Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Today we are in lesson 12.2, applying Mendel's principles. So, yesterday I dropped a lot of vocabulary on you, and you hopefully remember some of it because we're going to move forward. So, let's take a look at Gregor Mendel. There he is. He's an Austrian monk, sometimes called the father of genetics. And he was working at the monastery and he was studying the inheritance of 7 different traits in pea plants. Now, remember what did I do? Remember what a trait is. A trait is a physical characteristic. So, like my brown hair, that's a trait. Your height, it's a trait. So, Gregor Mendel was looking at these pea plants and he was studying easily observable either or characteristics. So he wouldn't have been studying hair color because there's lots of different shades of hair color, right? And he wouldn't have been just studying eye color because there's lots of different shades of eye color, but he was studying characteristics that were either or. So if you are a pea plant, you're either going to have a tall stem or a short stem. You're going to have a round seed or a wrinkled or dented seed. You're either going to have a yellow seed color or a green seed color. And you're either going to have purple flowers or white flowers. So these were the two either or characteristics that Gregor was studying. The significance or the importance of his work wasn't really recognized until way after he died because we didn't know much about DNA at that point. People really weren't thinking too much about genetics. So he was doing all this work, he was collecting all this data, he was learning so much that we're going to build upon in terms of we call them now Mendelian genetics, and it's kind of the foundation of genetics. It's where it all started. But everybody just thought he really liked peas, and now we realize he was actually doing some pretty significant science. So good stuff. Thank you, Gregor. Let's review some vocab. Remember, your genotype is your genetic characteristic. That could be big T, big T. We could also say that you're homozygous. We could say that it's dominant, or we could say that it's purebred. And if tall is dominant to short in pea plants, their stem height, we would use the letter T. So big T, homozygous dominant, phenotype tall. Big T, little t, the tall allele. Remember, these are called alleles. The tall allele is going to mask the little lowercase one. The phenotype would also be tall. So heterozygous, tall, or we could say hybrid. And then little t would be the only way to have that short stem, homozygous recessive or purebred short. So when we try to figure out what the offspring is going to look like when we have a pair of organisms cross, we apply the mathematical principles of probability. So Mendel applied this math. We're not going to do too much math, guys. It'll be okay. Mendel applied this math to the laws of heredity in order to make predictions about the results of these simple genetic crosses. Mendel's laws of heredity are based on his mathematical analysis of the observations of patterns of the inheritance of traits. It's a fancy way of saying the laws of probability govern simple genetic recombinations. You've heard of a Punnett square before. I know you have. You did these in life science. To complete a Punnett square, we use a letter to represent each allele. You knew that. We represent the dominant allele with a capital letter. You already knew that. And the recessive allele is given the same letter but in lowercase. So for our pea plant flowers, I told you that the purple color is dominant. So that's going to be letter P because we pick the letter based off of the dominant phenotype. So letter P. And the recessive is going to be lowercase p. It's not W. Everybody's like, the recessive would be a little W. No, that's something different. Okay, so capital P for the dominant characteristic, lowercase p for the recessive. If both parents were purebred, then the purple colored parent would be capital B, capital P. The white colored parent must be lowercase p, lowercase p. So what's this going to look like? We can predict possible combinations that would result if a homozygous purple flower crossed with a homozygous recessive flower. Homozygous, big P, homozygous recessive, big P, little p. What do you think is going to go in this box? Remember your old time multiplication table? Do you guys still do those where you like go down and across to see what like 3 times 3 is? That's kind of how we do these Punnett squares. We're going to bring the capital P down and we're going to bring the lowercase p across. We're going to do that in each of the squares. So the only possible genotype for the offspring is what? The only possible genotype for the offspring is big P, little p. The only possible phenotype for the offspring is what? The only possible phenotype is purple. So this kind of blew Mendel's mind. He was like, we have a purple plant here and a white plant here. How come all the offspring in this first generation are purple? And that's where he really discovered the law of dominance. There's a dominant characteristic in these traits that masks or overshadows the recessive. It's not a paint can kind of situation. There are some exceptions we'll talk about later, but if we're following basic Mendelian genetics, you have a dominant characteristic mask or overshadow the recessive characteristic. He remained curious, though, and he wanted to take this a step further and think about what would happen. We just answered those questions. What would happen in the second generation? We call that F2. It stands for second filial generation. So what would happen if he crossed a heterozygous purple plant, heterozygous big P, little p, with another heterozygous purple plant? So same thing. Big P comes down, big P comes across, big P comes across, little p comes down, big P, little p, little p, little p. You do the whole multiplication table action there, and what you end up with here is a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. 1, what do we call this one? Homozygous dominant. 2, what do we call them? Heterozygous dominant. And 1, homozygous recessive. So we would have a phenotypic ratio of 3 to 1. The phenotype is 3 purple, 1 white. A genotypic ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. So you've got to be able to communicate the results of your Punnett square in a couple different ways. If I say to you, what's the phenotypic ratio here? You would say, what? And then you would say, oh, it's 3 to 1. Okay, 3 purple, 1 white. And if we say, what's the genotypic ratio? It's always going to be 1 to 2 to 1 whenever you have a heterozygous cross. It also means that there's a 25% chance that anytime you have a heterozygous cross, you end up with a 25% chance of having that recessive characteristic. So one of the questions that you'll see is, how do two purple parents have a white offspring plant? And you would explain that the heterozygous cross, the two recessive little p's, there's a 25% chance with any given cross that the two recessive alleles will end up together to make the white flowers. All right. So that's that for today. That was a short one. Just a quick review of monohybrid crosses and Punnett squares. I am going to ask you to watch my sisters go over it as well. They talk about guinea pigs, super cute. I don't actually like them, but they're cute to look at. And then you're going to read chapter 12.2 and complete the 12.2 reading quiz. Thanks for your time today. Take care.